Hello, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Cinema Craptaculus Presents the Expanded Universe, with your hosts John H. Ford, Mario Doc Diaz, and s'more. From movies to TV series to toys to pop culture to romance, this show is your safe space for all things geeky and where you can get your geek on. This is John H., and with me as always is my geektacular co-host,
s'more.
And Doc is unavailable. Not here.
Just gone.
Nope.
Just checked out.
I think the topic scared him off.
I think he ran. He's hiding.
We're doing what? No.
Coward.
Pass. Hard pass. I don't want to talk about Bridget Jones.
Yep. Coward.
Okay, so our topic. So it's February, right? Love, hugs, and if you're single, then spite, wine, and vitriol.
Like me, bitter. Yes.
Yeah, and you just don't get on Facebook on Valentine's Day because you just, oh God, the couples.
I don't want that torture. No, I won't do it.
Oh yeah.
I refuse.
No, I thought this would be, a good Valentine episode. I don't think we've had one. I don't think you've ever had one on the Expanded Universe.
We've had similar. We talked about romantic movies a while back, but it wasn't for Valentine's Day. I'm not sure why we did.
No, we did talk about romantic movies, and S'more had some particularly strong opinions about one in particular.
Yeah, pretty much. Harry Met Sally. Overrated. Sorry.
Yeah,
had to clear my throat.
I think you inserted what you just did probably 10 times during the show.
Only 10 times? Should have done it more.
Yeah, it's funny because if anybody listens to our show who's like under 30, they literally never seen When Harry Met Sally.
And that's a good thing, people. Congratulate yourselves. Give yourselves a hand.
Stop it. Actually, I should up the age. Probably no one under 45 has probably seen it.
Again, congratulations for not seeing this. Don't.
The reason I actually suggested this topic is because I was ruminating on what I felt was a particular vibe I was getting from Hollywood movies. Now, everything in the last 3 years has just been kind of chaos. So I'm going to take a soft cudgel to any hard opinion I have about what is or isn't happening positively in movies, because it's just been hell on everybody. Just to make movies, to get movies into the theater, to get people into theaters. And I think I'm focusing on movies, not so much like what we see on streaming series and stuff. But joining us in this discussion on romance in the movies is the host of the podcast, Dennis Anyone, with Dennis Hensley. Dennis is a writer, performer, entrepreneur. I'm probably leaving a lot of things out. He is a podcast host of the show, Dennis Anyone, with Dennis Hensley. Let's give it up for Dennis Hensley. Thank you for joining us.
Dennis!
Hi, guys. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Nice to meet you, my friend.
Yeah, I love talking about this stuff.
Dennis, for those of our listeners who may not be familiar with your show, we'll talk a little bit about yourself, but tell us about your podcast.
My podcast is called Dennis Anyone with Dennis Hensley, and it's about making things up and making things happen. I love to talk to creative people in different walks of life, but I think of my guests as beautiful strugglers. They're not household named, but they're people doing cool things. Sometimes they have day jobs, and it's about like how art and creativity make life worth living. I like to find out why people do the things they do, talk about their projects, but also like how they keep it going and how they live a creative life and deal with the ups and downs of all of it. And we have a lot of fun.
What was the impetus for the show? Where did you get the idea?
My background is magazine journalism. I interviewed a lot of folks for a number of years for magazines like Movie Line and Cosmopolitan and TV Guide, and that was my bread and butter for a long time. And then magazines just sort of went away, especially the ones I worked for. And I love to interview people, and I it's my happy place. So I like to celebrate people that are doing cool things, and so I kind of pivoted from magazines to podcasting.
S'more, now we get to put him on the spot because he says he likes to interview people.
He does.
Now we get to interview him. Was your background before you got into journalism? Were you always a writer? Were you a performer that did both? What were sort of the formative days of Dennis Hensley?
Here's how I got into writing. I was a cruise ship dancer, highlight of my life. I loved it. And during one of the hiatuses, I auditioned for Madonna's Blonde Ambition tour. And I was a big fan at the time. I still am. I bought my tickets. I'm ready to go. I know she's weird, but I'm in. And I went to the audition, and it was such a rich experience, both because it was a little absurd. I got cut right away, but also I had this fantasy of what it would be like. So I wrote a story about it, and I started sending it to all these different magazines. And Movie Line magazine, a gentleman there named Edward Margulies, liked my voice, liked my writing, and started hiring me. And he published the piece, and he started giving me opportunities, and I basically ended up leaving dancing and the ships and performing and transitioning into writing. And it all happened because Madonna rejected me.
Well, it probably was a wise choice for a variety of factors, whether you too much seasick, You fall in love and you want a regular life, or you hurt yourself when, it capsizes from a wave.
Sure, it could happen. We've all seen Poseidon Adventure. No, I think for most people that work in that world, there's a point where you're like, I need to be done. Like you feel like the rest of your life is happening somewhere else without you. And that's the point that I got to. But it was wonderful at the time that I was doing it. In my early 20s, it was the best.
Real quick, I understand that you also host a game show. Am I correct?
I do host a couple of game shows. One is called, I host virtual game nights online of a game I co-created called You Don't Know My Life. It's a boxed party game that grew out of my interview questions that I've been using for years. I developed it with my friend Jeb Havens. We got it up on Amazon in 2019, and then we started doing virtual games for people online during the pandemic, and now we do them for corporations, for team building, and they book me through youdon'tknowmylife.com, and I come on and Zoom, and we have a game board, and the questions are about people's lives, so people get to know each other, and it's become my little side hustle, and I love it. And the other thing is I host this parody of the Match Game TV show called The Mismatch Game that we do as a benefit for the Gay and Lesbian Center here in LA. We've been doing it for 18 years. We raised over $220,000 so far, and we have, I'm not sure when this is airing, but we have a couple of shows coming up on the 10th and 11th of February in LA at the LA LGBT Center.
That is awesome. Let's be sure to revisit that as a plug at the end of the show.
Absolutely.
Okay?
I love it.
Thank you for joining us. S'more, I can tell you're so thrilled to talk about this topic.
Ford, I'm very open to all topics, even if I have little to no idea what they are. But that's
okay. So I was thinking about romance in the movies. And when I mean movies, I'm talking about like all the more mainstream fare, because I think there's probably niche films that kind of target love stories, maybe more, but Hollywood was romance central. And I was thinking about like some of the big blockbustery films, and particularly I started thinking about the Star Wars trilogy that came out starting in 2015, the JJ verse, what do they call it?
The JJ era, JJ verse, yeah.
And I look at those three films, and when you contrast it to the first trilogies, the original and the prequels, romance was not just kind of like an adjunct. It was kind of a through line in the action and the tragedy of the characters. The Han and Leia story was a big deal. And obviously, the original trilogy was all about romance because it's about two people that have kids. But the new trilogy felt like it was something, I don't know if it was taboo or if they just felt that if a younger audience doesn't care, but it just was like noticeably absent except for a little bit with the return of Han and Leia, but it felt like it just wasn't there. And then I looked at some of the other superhero movies. We get to, the Snyder stuff. Okay, you get Lois and Superman in the Man of Steel, but you don't really see their love story develop. Again, contrast that to Christopher Reeve, and that was all about the romance. And then you get to some of the Marvel stuff, and outside of Spider-Man and his sort of teen angst. So I thought it would be interesting to sort of dissect, prove me wrong, point out maybe where I'm missing some blind spots. But I feel like they don't want to do these big romances in these films.
Well, I don't think you're necessarily wrong. However, I think there's a lot involved in terms of committees creating these movies and directing these movies. Let's take the Star Wars trilogy you just brought up. There were hints of possible romances there, but I got a strong feeling, and this is based on stuff I read and people I've spoken to who work in the industry, that corporations didn't want to touch it because it was too volatile. You have something between Finn and Rey. You have something between Finn and Poe. But
I was going to bring up Finn and Poe,
right?
yeah. But it was underneath.
It was underneath. It was there, but I got the sneaky suspicion that the powers that be, i.e. producers and directors and executives, were still hesitant to test those waters. So they just ignored it. I don't know. Dennis, what do you think?
Well, I've been thinking about this a bit recently because a lot of the big movies, there is no romance, like very little. And I was thinking about The Rock recently. He's one of the sexiest specimens, muscular, beautiful.
Right. He's a beast.
Never plays romantic. Never. Have we ever seen him kiss a woman?
No, but we've seen him in relationships that go nowhere.
Right. But it's not a card that he ever plays. And I think that's on purpose, but I'm not sure why.
Do you think it has to do with these films are all designed to be cultural juggernauts in other countries, and they want to maybe sidestep offending people one way or the other, whether it's interracial romance or same-sex romance or whatever, that they feel like that four-quadrant appeal will be in jeopardy. Why? They're like, well, why even risk it?
Yeah, I get the sense. I mean, you guys have seen Red Notice with Ryan Reynolds and The Rock and Gal Gadot.
I have not seen it. With this was a couple years ago. Is it fun?
No, it's fun, but it's skippable.
It's skippable. But there are implications between The Rock and Gal Gadot that just, again, it was there, but it was never quite explored, and I wonder why. Is it because...
you'll spoil the movie if you talk about it, though. Does anybody care?
It came out in 2017, 2018. Get on it, people.
No, it came out last year.
Oh, last year? Okay, never mind.
Well, whatever. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but
get on it.
I agree with you. I'm looking at a lot of, again, mainstream fare, and I have not seen Avatar 2, which did way better than I predicted. Mm-hmm. I think the S'more, we did not predict that would do that well. No. And even looking at the other big hit of the year, the films that saved the box office, quote unquote, Top Gun Maverick, even that romance is treated so carefully and quietly and politely. And I don't know if it's kind of like they don't want to offend people that are mad that Kelly McGillis isn't asked back.
They faxed her twice and she never got back to them. Right. That's what you really feel like the makers were like, you know what, let's send her a fax, and if we don't hear from her in 5 minutes, we're just going to move on. That's how I felt like they paid her homage. Yeah, I mean, you know what? It's been 45 minutes. Get Connolly on the line. You know, she had her chance. Like, that's really how I felt like the film felt about Kelly McGillis.
Well, in that case, I felt like they were concentrating on more storylines than the first one, so that again, we're talking about the romance seems to be taking a backseat, not being in the driver's seat.
But I did like the romance in Top Gun Maverick. I thought she was age appropriate. They were good together. Like, I thought that part of the movie worked. I enjoyed the whole thing. But that feels almost like a rarity that they would have that much romance in a movie.
True. And even in that film, I mean, if you compare it to the first Top Gun, I think the first Top Gun, the romance took precedence over the rest of the film, whereas this one, it was there, but it was more like a side story.
I think there's also a reaction to the Me Too movement, all of the sex scandals, all of the inappropriate stories we're hearing about, and these things with intimacy coordinators. Like, if you were to see a movie with two movie stars playing love scenes or a story, and you came out and said they were hot together, that's an honest opinion and probably what they were going for. But even that feels a little bit like, oh, is that exploitive? Can we even say that anymore? Like, we're sort of missing that kind of heat in movies, and maybe that changes for the best because there was a lot of bad behavior and stuff going on. Oh, yeah. But it feels almost like taboo to even think about it. Like, I was thinking about a movie called The Lost City with Channing Tatum and Sandra Bullock from last year. Really fun. I love those kind of movies, kind of romancing the stone, and it was a rom-com in a way, an adventure, and they ended up being a couple. And they had great chemistry, but kind of like brother-sister jokey chemistry. You never felt like the heat. Yeah. Maybe when they were dancing a little bit. Yeah. Like, you never felt like, oh, they're going to bang in that hammock.
Agreed.
Like, yeah, there's a certain sort of tameness, I think, even to the movies that are romantic.
So, Dennis, do you think Hollywood is just simply scared now to do romance?
I don't know. Or I think it's always about money. So maybe they just think it doesn't, I don't think it sells, you know? I'm going to tell you a funny story, and it's a little embarrassing. So one of the people I interviewed for my podcast is a filmmaker named Matt Carter out of the UK. And he's a gay guy, and he plays rugby over there, and he wrote a romance set in the gay rugby league called In From the Side. And it's these hot guys playing rugby, and they're both in other relationships, and they have an affair. And I first saw it on YouTube, like a clip from a music video. It wasn't even the movie. And there was something about that clip, the way one of the guys looked at the other guy. They were out at an amusement park, and he looked at him with such longing and love that I froze the screen and took a picture of it, and I put it on my dream board. Because I want that in my life, that kind of love, lust, longing, I'm into this person moment. And I think why it jumped out at me is because we just don't see that. We don't see, Sarah Jessica Parker looking at Big the way that we used to see people fall in love on screen. It used to be really exciting, and you would see it in their eyes. And certain actors were better than others. And I tracked down that filmmaker because of that moment that I wanted to talk to him, because it's so rare that we see people falling in love on screen and like real sort of epic stories of love. Although maybe they're doing them on TV. I don't know. Like Bridgerton is all about romance, right?
I think they are. And I think what we've also sort of been observing, and we talk about it a lot on the Expanded Universe, is just the fracturing of audiences into niches that are being exploited successfully in the streaming world. Meaning that whatever your identity is, whatever your tastes are, you can probably find something caters to you literally by filtering it in your search. As you watch more of that type of film or series, that's what pops up in your feed. And so the decisions that go into what may be a film that would go into the theater, maybe we're being I'm jumping the gun because they're still not sure what's supposed to go to the theater because it's becoming a really challenging place to make money. The cinemas are closing. Yeah. Audiences are used to being on their couch or on their phones. And you bring up a good point because that scene that you talked about in that movie, I saw in an episode of Sex Education on Netflix, a British comedy. But there was a scene with one of the main characters and he gives this girl this diary and says, I know you hate birthdays, so what I've done is a 5-year diary and I've ripped out the day of your birthday each year so you never have to see your birthday. They have unrequited love, and now he's in a relationship with someone else, and she turns around, and the look that she gives him is probably the look that you saw. I wanted to screen cap that and
it's
just,
like lightning in a bottle.
Right, and tweet to say always strive to make someone feel the way this person feels in that moment. And it was such but again, it's a TV series, not a movie.
Yeah, and you both bring up interesting points. I mean, I think perhaps with film, people simply don't quite know how to write out a love story simply because they don't have time to tell a proper one. I think this audiences have become more sophisticated, and so we know what we want to see in a love story and in episodic television, because I see it more on Netflix and streaming. You have enough time to develop a believable romance. Whereas in movies, no matter how interesting the characters are or what the topic of the movie is about, you just simply don't have enough time to write out that sort of connection, that sort of romance, not at least in one film. It might take several films to do it. Who knows? Maybe writers simply don't know how to write a believable romance in a short amount of time, which is why we don't see it.
Yeah, that could be true. I think technology plays a role too, because who wants to watch a bunch of text flying back and forth on Tinder? And the movies that do text bubbles and stuff, it's fine, but it's not the same as being at an event and running into a person and following them into the alley and making out and they ghosted me after 3 texts. That's not cinematic. And I feel like in our own lives, we're all disconnected. We're not bumping into each other as much anymore. So there's less spontaneity and there's less opportunity for those spontaneous
connections
that pop up. Yeah.
I think it's also obvious that that notion of a rom-com, just like the raunch-com, kind of had a window that seems to have just sort of naturally closed. Even before the pandemic and people were switching to maybe watching more streaming stuff. So it has the opportunity to maybe come back. Mm-hmm. But I wonder if there are more, Dennis, you brought up, the business aspect. And I wonder if there are concerns that, not that they're sitting there running the numbers, but, that they tell writers or in the screenplays that they look at, look, we don't want to affect our liberal colleagues by making just a flat-out heterosexual romance that's just going to appear dated in very early 2000s. Conversely, if we try to be broaden it, we're going to offend this wide swath of conservative America. And if we do something that maybe different cultures we're trying to be sensitive, but will come off as being cloying, like we're trying to just ape what worked that in this film that did well overseas. And so they get all sort of self-conscious. And I think this is where we would benefit from having an active screenwriter to say, oh, guys, you guys are so wrong.
So you're saying they're overthinking it, John? Is that what you're saying?
I think they're looking at what sells, to Dennis's earlier point.
Also, with romantic comedies, it's hard to do a sequel. We had Star Wars. We've had 28 million sequels or whatever it is. With rom-coms, they get together at the end, and Bridget Jones, they did a few. But there's not. It feels like, okay, maybe you put Richard Gere and Julia Roberts in another movie together, or Julia Roberts and George Clooney in another movie. But it's hard to just keep going back to that well the way you can with superheroes or Star Wars and things like that. Yeah,
excellent point.
You can't destroy Happily Ever After to make another movie, because that's exactly what you're going to have to do it.
Yeah.
Well, what they ended up doing is they try to up the ante with what's the obstacle. So it was meet the parents. Well, now it's meet my parents. And then it's we have kids, and now so they try to throw in those sort of life obstacles. Because once the couple's together, there's nowhere to go.
But then do audiences buy that in this day and age? Again, I think a lot of audiences have become a little bit more sophisticated in their storytelling. And you look at that and you go, that wouldn't happen, or that's just movies. That's cheesy. Let's move on.
But I think the cheese can be part of the appeal. Like last year, I went to see a movie called Marry Me with Jennifer Lopez and Owen Wilson in the theater. My friend and I were like, we go to these mid-level J-Lo movies like they're church. And that movie delivered on every count because you don't know what year it is. What year are we? Is it 2022? Is it 2004? It's Owen Wilson's got that same hair. J-Lo's timeless beauty. We could walk out and it can be the Bush years. I don't know where we are, but I'm happy to be there. But they also don't make as many mid-budget movies anymore, whether they're erotic thrillers or family dramas or whatever it is. They just don't make those movies. Like, I was on Twitter the other day and somebody posted a thread where they were like, drop in your favorite mid-budget movie from the 90s that always like stops you on cable when you're scrolling. And he put in The First Wives Club. And then somebody else put Failure to Launch, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. And they weren't all like classics of the genre. They weren't Mean Girls and Clueless, these movies that have lived on. They were just sort of like Serendipity with Kate Beckinsale. And
I remember that.
And this thread went on, and you're like, oh, I remember that movie, that one with Ashley Judd. And it was like these mid-level came and went movies at the box office. Maybe they did okay, but over time, people have taken some of them into their heart. Some people have, like, oh, I love that thing with Kate Hudson where she wore the dress. That was horrible. Yeah, but I love it. Like, they don't make those mid-level movies anymore.
Hey, we'll be right back. And now, back to the show.
There was also a shock value in certain films that became its own genre. I mean, and you see them in thumbnails on your Amazon or your whatever your menu is, and you're like, oh my God, Basic Instinct, never get made now. No way.
No.
Oh, yeah.
No. Was it? What's the speaking of Madonna? Was it?
Body of Evidence.
Body of Evidence, yeah.
Which shot in my hometown, I remember.
Wow.
Yeah, like these films were erotic thrillers, and Michael Douglas, as an example, was always sort of at the cusp of some sort of social Rubicon that once we cross it, we have to discuss it. So, like, obviously, Fatal Attraction was kind of the first one, and it was like, about affairs, and we have to talk about it, and was the ending justified? And then we find out that it wasn't the real ending, and it becomes this social discussion. And he kind of did it again with what was the one with Demi Moore about sexual harassment. Disclosure.
The first time I'd ever seen somebody use email on screen was Disclosure. Ooh, what are they doing? Somebody's writing an email? What's that?
Basic Instinct was about, like, can a woman be both the hero and the villain and the seductress, and who is being victimized? Is it the protagonist, or is it, and so those types of erotic thrillers that had some sort of social meat on the bone to discuss a little bit. I think, well, first of all, nobody discusses that. They may have a show that they like that they recommend to their friends, but there isn't that connective tissue of like, oh, did you see that movie? Oh, yeah. And to Dennis's point, that era of the romantic comedies in the 2000s, it was just home runs like nonstop, and then it just stopped.
Well, you both bring up an excellent point. All those movies we've just named that we talked about either occurred in the late 90s towards the mid-aughts, and then the zeitgeist changed. I think we've been through 9/11, of course. We've been through a pandemic. We've been through Black Lives Matters. We've been through racial strife. And I think people's tastes in terms of romantic comedies have changed because, quite frankly, I think we're a little bit more jaded. We look at that now and we go, that's a fairy tale. We have bigger problems pressing right now. I think movie makers are betting on that we're jaded, and so they shy away from those romantic comedies. Doesn't mean it's going to not come back. Our moods might change. Society might change. But I think that's at least one way to explain it. It's like we simply are a little bit more cynical about love.
Well, animated films have sort of pulled away from it too because they're not courageous enough to put LGBTQ relationships at the forefront. They'll put them in the film, and then they have to decide, are we going to make a deal out of it or are we going to not make a deal out of it? Mm-hmm. And who are we going to offend and not offend? And again, they get in their heads. And then you look at sort of the princess stuff, and I think they've realized that, our DNA is in a lot of these sort of princess fairy tales. Mm-hmm. But you're right. The audience now, even a young person now, is probably not going to necessarily, and probably not going to have parents that want them to maybe absorb that too much either. Because the parents are smart enough, I think, to go like, you know what? Life is not Sleeping Beauty. Do we really want to keep putting that out there? So Disney, I think, as an example, I don't think we're seeing a lot of romance because I think they're kind of overthinking it. Maybe for the right reasons. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Again, I think part of it is people a little bit cynical. I also think that people are a little bit scared because our notion of relationships have changed, or at least expanded. It's not simply the white guy and the white girl getting together. You have representation. You have mixed races getting together. And I still think people in certain sects of the country, and I'm not going to call out those sects of the country, you know who you are, I think they're uncomfortable seeing that because they're not used to it. And so executives who want to make money recognize this, and they want to do their best not to offend people. So rather than include it, we just don't.
I think that's true. I thought one of the best rom-coms of the last year was Bros. I don't know if you guys saw that. It's a gay romantic comedy with Billy Eichner and Luke McFarlane, and it really went for it. It was edgy. It had a lot of sex appeal. It was really funny. It was really honest, and it had all of the sort of rom-com tropes, but they came at them in a really unique way. It was really funny. Didn't do great, but I feel like people are going to discover it online and streaming and stuff, and I think it'll age well as a comedy. But they don't make that many of them, for sure.
Right. And we had this movie. Where was the marketing for it? There wasn't a ton of marketing, from what I recall.
Well, they marketed it in kind of a strange way, and then after it didn't do well, everyone was like, they shouldn't have done that. And they kind of sold it as this historic, there's never been a gay studio comedy before, and you need to go support this. And they made it feel like if you didn't support it, you were a bad ally or something, whereas it should have been just like, I think they should have just had people coming out of the movie saying how funny it was, because it's really funny. But, and then it sort of followed on the heels of Judd Apatow, Trainwreck. It had that kind of flavor to it. But I watched Bridesmaids the other night. That wasn't that long ago. And that was a big hit in the rom-com, kind of little bit of gross out comedy in there as well.
True. They came out, 2010, 2011, something like that?
Something like that, 2011, I think maybe 2011, like 10 years ago.
I think everything started to change around 2015, and even the raunch comedies that kind of either had romance or had it cursorily, the Vince Vaughn, the Hangover stuff,
right.
That Ron Burgundy stuff, that kind of dried up around the same time.
Yeah.
And going back to what S'more said about writing, you said that writers don't know how to write. I think writers, it's not that hard to write a romantic comedy because there's a million examples you can pattern, and if you've got a star, but I think they're hesitant to write it because either they think that, the only executive that would look at it works at Hallmark or Lifetime, and I really don't want to have to go down that route. If I don't, I'm purposely leaving those out of the discussion because they're television. But again, I don't want to bash them. I don't watch them during the holidays.
And we're not bashing.
A lot of people get their SAG insurance from those movies.
Exactly. But again, I'm talking about we've talked a lot about on our show about just how young people are not being trained to go to the movies, and that not just the genre of film, but the social ritual of going to the movies is starting to disappear because young people, they're not being trained to do that. There's just, as a parent, you can't say, hey, okay, here's some money and go find some friends and go see the latest movie. They look at you like, what? No, we're gonna get on WhatsApp, or we're gonna play video games, or it's a whole cultural shift, right?
Right.
Yeah, and if you look at the people that are starring in romantic comedies, Sandra Bullock had one last year, Julia Roberts had one last year, Jennifer Lopez. It's the same people from 20 years ago.
Right.
Sarah Jessica Parker, we're still watching her. Who's the next one? Who's the young Zendaya? I don't know. She's on Euphoria doing crazy shit. It's a different thing. So I don't know. Maybe younger people don't want it, don't need it, aren't into it.
Not to get into a huge rabbit hole even more than we have, but I think that we are at risk of as much as damage that was probably done in the 80s, learning your social cues from John Hughes movies and National Lampoon's movies. I think that there is a value to content creators who are helping young people sort of see positive examples of interactions, whatever the couples are. For instance, the school my son goes to, they don't have dances. And I was like, what?
What?
No dancing?
Breaks my heart.
Break out Footloose, quick.
I know.
Okay, we don't need to have the prom because that puts a lot of pressure. But a lot of schools will make it like you don't have to have a date, just everybody shows up. If you want a date, you can, and if you don't. But a lot of people would go in groups. They'd go with groups of 3 or 4 as friends. And you've got kids who are maybe just coming out, other kids who are just shy. But I still feel like movies and TV have value to show positive interactions. And if they're not seeing that, where are they going to see it?
Well, that begs a question for you both. Do you feel like young people aren't tuning in to watch these movies simply because they don't see themselves in them? There's no connection for them. They don't recognize what these movies are because it doesn't apply to their world. So they're not interested.
There could be some of that. I've heard some studies saying that younger people are having less sex than older previous generations.
Yeah.
Like there's less of it. They drive later. They're not as eager to get their driver's licenses. There's a lot of, I think things are different than when I was younger in terms of what you were into or how you wanted to go out into the world. Like I couldn't wait to get my driver's license. Like,
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, maybe they're hooking up in different ways. I do watch the Sex Lives of College Girls TV show, and that's very like young and kind of the moment, and it's still fun and kind of sexy, and definitely the current generation, you know, which is interesting.
But I wonder how accurate shows like that are. I mean, I'm not sure who writes these shows. Are they young people writing these shows? Are they Gen Xers writing these shows? You know, is it fantasy?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I know that one of them is created by Mindy Kaling, so. I don't know. I feel like there's just not a lot of heat in the movies. You know, like remember Mr. and Mrs. Smith with Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie? That was hot. Like I feel like it's almost a sin to say we want to make a hot movie. That would be like
You're gonna be canceled.
You would get canceled.
You're
just
canceled.
for the idea of it. And I think as a culture, we're so immature about sex. Like still. And that's one of the movies I really loved last year was Good Luck to You, Leo Grande with Emma Thompson, the British movie where she's an older woman that's never really explored her sexuality and she hires an escort. And the whole thing takes place over their different encounters in the hotel room. And it was just honest. And it was so refreshing because it's a part of all of our lives, sexuality and romance.
Absolutely.
Or whether we're experiencing it, whether we're not, whether we want to. It's something everyone can relate to on some level, and yet we don't always deal with it in a very mature way, especially when you compare it to something like violence, which we clearly have no problem with.
Of course.
Exactly.
To this day, still.
Yeah. I want to see more of those movies.
I do too, and I think that obviously a mature mind can look at your average romantic comedy from previous eras and say, yes, that likely wouldn't play out that way. That I doubt that character would end up with that character. In reality, Patrick Dempsey would probably not be left at the altar.
Mr. McSteamy, yes.
Yes.
Or no, is he McDreamy? Is he McDreamy or
He's
McSteamy?
McDreamy.
McDreamy, okay.
He's McDreamy.
I think that those unrealistic endings are something that maybe writers are mindful of, and I think a lot to your earlier points, I think you both said that audiences are very sophisticated. Young people are sophisticated. And these TV shows that you mentioned that we've discussed, because of the format, they have more time to explore the nuances of relationships that maybe a 2-hour, 90-minute film really doesn't.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm all for like the unrealistic fun endings because part of the reason why I tune into movies and romantic comedies is because it's a fantasy and it's fun to imagine and dream.
Exactly. Yeah. And you put yourself in that person's shoes, even if you can't relate to them.
Exactly.
I would like to see them come back. I'd like to see more people see themselves in it and maybe not just be the sidekick or the comic relief. And that requires the studios, somebody sort of saying, okay, we're going to have to take a bit of a risk on this and then start making some stars because I mean, God, I look at like the films that like when I was a little kid that like my older siblings went to, they weren't funny romance. Well, they were all, if the funny ones starred Barbra Streisand and Ryan O'Neal.
Oh, I love that movie.
But the romantic comedy I think was really born in the 80s, but flourished to your points in the 90s and particularly in the 2000s. Dennis, you seem to be pretty versed on a lot of the recent stuff, but what are films that you feel like that kind of address everything we've discussed that you could really recommend?
Well, I don't know. I was just thinking about Love Actually recently because it was the holidays, and it's not one of my favorites, but people love that movie. And it's because it has a lot of those longing looks in it. Like you feel all of the love coming from the people. And I went to that movie when it came out with somebody that I had dated for a while, but they didn't. I was in love with them, and they broke it off and just wanted to be friends. Oh. So let's go see Love Actually as friends. not a good idea.
Ouch!
Not a great idea.
Ouch! God damn it!
Yeah.
So he got to the Andrew Lincoln scene, and his friend is kind of looking at his watch, and Dennis is just like bawling.
I mean, I'm Emma Thompson when she gets the Joni Mitchell CD and not the necklace or whatever it is. That's one that comes to mind. You know what? Last night I watched a J-Lo romantic adventure called Shotgun Wedding on Amazon.
Oh, it's
how
the
was
new
it?
one. Yeah.
Yes. You know what? I had fun. She was better in Marry Me. I think the character's a little daffy, and J-Lo's whole brand is I've got my act together. Yeah. So when she's being daffy, you're like, it's not on brand.
It's weird.
It's a little, when she's kind of being a little like, I'm going to faint or whatever. J-Lo, you don't J-Lo's like on top of it. But it's fun. Jennifer Coolidge steals it. She's funny in every moment that she says. And I watched it because I also do writing as well. And I watched it and I thought, this is a kind of movie that a writer like me could write and maybe get a little traction on. Whereas I'm not going to write Avengers. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
This is a kind of movie that I also like to go see it. And Josh Duhamel is aging beautifully. He was like
Silver Fox,
a real like romantic lead, handsome, like more than I think I used to think.
Silver Fox, right?
Silver Fox.
There you go.
And they had, some good romance in the movie, and they were beautiful to look at. And it had kind of some Romancing the Stone kind of adventure stuff, a big zip line moment. I think it's the kind of, it delivers on what you want it to be, and what you think,
So it had those looks you were talking about, those longing
a little bit of that,
okay.
a little bit of that, and then just wacky adventure. But you do feel like people are afraid to get very sexy. The Bond movies now. He used to always like have to have sex with some rando,
right?
Or it's not a Bond. And now he's kind of like leaving notes. Like it's just different. You know what I mean? Like it's a little. That used to make somebody cooler, and now it's diminishing, right? So and I kind of miss something that's a little dangerous, a little sexy, a little spontaneous.
Well, to your point, I think people are afraid to get a little dangerous, a little sexy, because we just laughed at it. It's like Bond leaves a note now, but a lot of people look at earlier
I don't even
Bond.
know if he does, but he feels like he does.
Right?
I wish I could teach a class like in high school, not necessarily in English or film or theater, but like a class where young people could watch the romantic comedies or romance films we talk about, and somehow pull away the icky, dated, very pre-Me Too racist stuff that is inherent in a lot of older stuff.
In surprising ways, when you're watching, you're like, oh my gosh.
Anything beyond 1990, we can't do that, correct?
But it's too bad, because there are so many. We could spend a whole show talking about the best romantic comedies, and it's too bad that we have to neuter them in a way like, we can't show Tootsie because it'll offend people because he dresses up as a woman. But the romance in that is actually really funny and beautiful. I mean, it's 40 years old, but it's good. But hopefully the writers now, and Dennis, I actually just want to thank you for pointing out some of the recent stuff, because just in our discussion, I feel a lot more optimistic. I feel like there is a lot of stuff that I'm missing, and I think part of it is I focus on series and maybe I avoid some of the films. Yeah, maybe they're not going to the cinemas. Maybe that'll just take some time. I'm hopeful, but it's nice to know that even in the streaming world, that there seem to be some options.
Yeah, I would love to see us make some romantic comedy movie stars, younger ones. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm just forgetting somebody that's right in my face, but I don't feel like we have the new Julia Roberts, Sandra Bullock, J-Lo,
I don't think
Zellweger.
We do. Not really. Not on that level. I think a lot of our movies they're blockbusters now. They're superhero movies,
right?
Or sci-fi
Zoe Saldana
movies.
is blue in every movie, or green.
Right?
Like, she is not, the ad exec with the big presentation, but she meets the milkman and spills milk on her presentation. She's in a green screen suit for the next 20 years.
Right?
ScarJo's like, I guess I'm going to be crouching and fighting for the next 20 years.
Superhero landings for the next 20 years.
For the next 20 years. I think, which is great. It's good to have a rich diet as an actor. But I think when they're like coming up, they're like, I'm going to be doing that for that much. And they're like, yep. And here's how much you're going to make. Okay, I'm in. Fine. All right.
I mean, can't.
I'm going to buy an island. It'll be fine. Yeah.
You can't
they're
buy
fun. No. And you know what? Here's the interesting thing. I find that the romantic moments in the superhero movies are my favorite moments.
Really?
The banter, yes. The banter with Iron Man and Gwyneth Paltrow.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
A little banter. I like a little banter, like that sort of old school, 40s kind of banter moments, like the upside down kiss in Spider-Man 2.
Right.
When they're romantic, those are my moments that I like the superhero movies the most.
Well, Peter Quill and Gamora, Zoe Saldana and green makeup. Those moments where they're just being romantic and going back and forth. Those were great. They really were.
And of course they took her out of the equation because she doesn't exist anymore now. There's the other time frame version.
Gamora,
So we'll see if James Gunn can bring it home in the third final outing romantically.
Probably not.
I agree with you. And honestly, to bring it full circle to Star Wars, when I think of what I love most about the Star Wars trilogy, and it could just be a personal thing and I was a kid, I wasn't a teenager, I wasn't an adult, but the Han and Leia romance in Empire Strikes Back. Like, if I had to pick like my favorite moment, it's when he's about to get frozen, and she says, "I love you." And we all know the story that there was a line written that Lawrence Kasdan had some dialogue, and Harrison Ford said, "I think we can do better. I think Han Solo can do better." George wasn't thrilled with his choice, and then they saw the cut, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that was the right thing." But that moment, I just love. Has nothing to do with sword fights.
But guys, could we get away with that today? If someone straight up said, "I love you," yeah, I know. People will be up in arms. What? That's unrealistic. That's insensitive. Douchebag ass.
But it's so him. It's so his character. I think if the character's well drawn, you'll go with it. If it makes sense for the characters, and deep down he's cuddly.
Cuddling his own grumpy.
He's not going to be. He's not going to be as a cuddly in a few seconds when he's in carbonite, but he's cuddly. I think, Dennis. I think we have to do a second show with you because
yes, absolutely.
This was fun, guys. I'm happy.
This has opened up so many can of worms of topics, and we
didn't even talk about Katherine Heigl.
Oh, Katherine Heigl.
Yeah,
she's still working.
So screenwriters have forgiven her, right? She's now.
Is she working? Is she back? No?
I think she's doing stuff. I think she's maybe on some platform doing things. Yeah.
Put her with a younger male actor. That seems to be the rage.
Oh, there you go.
You know?
Yeah.
Makes money.
All right. Well, Dennis, thank you for joining us on
my pleasure, guys.
Thank you, Dennis.
On this romance. And thank you to our listeners for, well, first of all, I'm just all over the map because I'm so excited to have a fellow film buff. Dennis, before we go, what are you working on now?
I have my podcast, Dennis Anyone, which you can find anywhere you get your podcasts. My website is dennisanyone.net. I also write podcast episodes for a company called Wondery. That's my main gig, and I write for a show called Even the Rich. So I recently wrote about Whitney Houston for a 4-episode series, and I'm working on the Pride episodes now with a gay icon that I don't know if I'm allowed to say who it is, but it's going to be out in June, and that's sort of my main writing gig.
And you mentioned the benefit for your game show.
Yes,
let's talk about the dates
we're doing
for
the
that.
Mismatch Game at the Gay and Lesbian Center. It's a parody of the old Match Game TV show. I host it, and we're doing that on February 10th and 11th. A pre-Valentine's crazy little thing called Love Edition. We had it on Super Bowl Sunday, and nobody realized it because we're gay. And I was like, somebody's like, that's the Super Bowl, and I was like, I better send some emails and see if we can move it. Because Rihanna's at the Super Bowl. So we're not going up against Riri. No, we're not crazy. So, yeah. So that's happening
funny.
here in LA.
That's great.
Where can we find this? Where can we find you?
That you can find through the LA Gay and Lesbian Center, LALGBTcenter.org.
Okay.
We'll have information about that. And and I'm Dennis C. Hensley on Instagram and Hensley Dennis on Twitter.
Very cool.
So,
well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been
thanks
a pleasure.
for having me. This was really fun.
Absolute pleasure.
I would look at you guys with longing looks like in that movie I saw, but
Yes!
I forgot how. I forgot I'm out of practice. I really need to work it up. That's what happens when we don't have the movies to show us the way.
Bring those movies back, people. Bring them back.
I think you have just framed the best sort of Valentine wish that we on our show and me personally could just give to anybody is to find that longing, provide that longing for someone else, and for people who maybe don't have that longing to prop them up. Because I think that I love what you said about that longing.
Right. Maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't, but you got to be in it to win it. And you want to have more of those moments in your life.
And deep down, that's what we all want. We want that.
Yeah.
I want that.
Yes.
John, do your best longing face. Your best longing face. Quick, go.
You're on the podcast.
I can't do it.
Guys, it's spectacular. Can't see it, but spectacular.
All right, I know. My lighting's not the best, but I'm giving you serious bedroom eyes.
Oh, I can see it.
You can see it?
We're going to have to take some selfies and for our key art to promote the show of our
right.
longing look. And
With our longing looks?
it's going to make it look like it's
looks.
the saddest show. No one's going to want to listen to
Not if you do it right.
That's the challenge. Thank you. You're right.
Right. Well, thank you, Dennis, and thank you to our audience, for those of you who are openly geeky and closeted geeky, for joining us on this expanded universe romantic journey.
Aw.
This has been John H.H., and with me, as always, is my geektacular co-host.
This is S'more. And remember that this is your safe space to talk about all things geeky and where you can get your geek on.
Oh, and Dennis, we all say geek out together, okay,
Oh, okay.
including our guests, okay?
But let's say it
One-
longingly.
Okay.
Yeah, with longing looks. Okay, I'll count it. 1, 2, 3.
Geek
out. Okay, you were very kind of Barry White, Dennis, which is
I was trying to say it faster. I didn't realize you drew it out a little bit.
He was kind of romantic. I was kind of pathetic.
I was silly.
I came in too hot, I think.
No, it was fine. It was
All right.
we were trying to do longing, so it worked.
Right. We didn't even talk about Jennifer Aniston.
We didn't talk about Love, exciting and new. Hey, if you like this episode and you've subscribed to Cinema Craptaculus, the channel, then you probably know you get a totally different show every week, such as People Also Watched with Dave, Adam, and Tara. They're three industry knuckleheads that always seem to find the hilarity in every movie they review. There is, of course, the expanded universe. This is your place to geek out. John, Doc, and S'more are your geek experts. Talk about what's going on in the streaming movie and series world, superheroes, Star Wars, James Bond, pretty much any pop culture nerd stuff that you can feast your eyes on. They're going to talk about it. And of course, there's the show that started it all, Cinema Craptaculus, with Stephanie, John, and Dave. You don't even need to have seen the movies these guys talk about to have a good time. And if you want to join the conversation, please follow us on the socials. We're at Craptaculus on Instagram and Twitter. We're also on Facebook, and you can also go to cinemacraptaculus.com. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your suggestions, maybe for some topics or movies you want us to cover. Hive mind, people, hive mind. You know what? That term kind of creeps me out. My brain just goes right to, the Borg in Star Trek. Just creepy.